Connor Hellebuyck adding yet another win on the season to an already super impressive Vezina campaign. Actually, he did it for Team USA. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, Jets fans. Welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for choosing to make Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's show, we are talking about Team USA versus Finland as the opener. Some interesting takeaways. For the Four Nations second game, it was not quite the dramatic thriller that we had in Canada versus Sweden. Now, I will say I did kind of expect, a rather impressive performance from Team USA, in part because Team Finland, man, just look at the roster, right? Great forwards, atrocious defense. It was a really, really rough outing. And I think, what happened for Team Finland was that they came out really aggressive early. And, honestly, Team USA did not seem to have expected, this early push from Finland. I think the Finns probably knew that, they needed to jump out to an early lead, try and catch the US off guard, get to Hellebuyck early and maybe sink in, one or two goals and try to turn the tide. Well, it did kind of work for a little bit, right? Jokiharju ended up scoring the first goal of the game. A little bit of a fluky one. Hellebuyck probably won't like the footage on the back play, but after that, the U.S. kind of struggled with the forecheck and pressure, and Finland looked pretty competent. They looked like they were really up for the game, and despite having a really miserably bad blue line, one where honestly, if Ville Heinola had gotten caught up, he might have actually been on the top pairing and been an improvement. It's that bad. It wasn't really apparent that they were that bad to begin with, just because Finland's forwards were doing a fabulous job being very careful with their passes. The puck management was very controlled. And when, the U.S. would try to counter and stuff, the five-man unit on the ice for Finland was very disciplined, very controlled, and the forwards, I think, covered for the D beautifully. The problem with doing that while also aggressively forechecking is you just start to expend a lot of energy. And Team USA is one of those teams where if things aren't working for them, they can just throw together some monster line combo. We had Connor with Tkachuk, Matthew that is, and Eichel on the first line. Later in the game, they swapped to both Tkachuks in lieu of moving Connor a little bit further down the lineup onto like the second or third line. And so after that, it seemed like the U.S. started to take off. And then in the third period, all heck broke loose, right? Team USA scored not long before the end of the second period. Then Finland took a late last-second penalty, and the power play at the start of the third period really just seemed to suck the life out of Finland. This is one of those things where I think, they don't really have much of a chance in this tournament. Their blue line is just too bad, and you're coming up against two teams, or at least you're coming up in this first one against one of the top two teams in the whole tournament, right? There's only four, but there's a clear division between Sweden and Finland and Canada and the U.S. Even between Canada and the U.S., there's probably a fairly large stratification. So, this is a really tough, tall task for Finland. And I think early on, they showed a lot of fight, a lot of grit, but it just stopped mattering at a point. Once the U.S. started potting a couple past Saros, it was over, right? And Finland's offense never really got going. Despite bringing guys like Rantanen, Barkov, Lehkonen, and some of the top Finnish forwards in the whole league, and really some of the top players in the league, it didn't really matter, right? The blue line couldn't move the puck. Offensively, Jokiharju being the only one to record a goal on a blue line that's not really known for a lot of high-end scoring probably tells you that the night was just not great for Finland's whole skater core. And Saros, that third goal that he let in, it was a bit of a turning wrister, and I think he probably just lost track of it or something. I think it was a seeing eye wrist shot that really shouldn't have beaten him almost from the point. And so, I think that just kind of took all of the energy out of what Finland had left in the tank. And then the U.S. just started paddling them. It was not close after that. The U.S. wins 6-1. And I kind of thought it would be a little bit of a closer game just because the Finns can be very stingy. But after that, it just started to fall apart. And, there wasn't much to write home about. Hellebuyck, for his part, did a pretty solid job in net. He didn't really have to do a ton. There were one or two breakaway opportunities that the Finns had, but otherwise, I feel like he just wasn't tested a lot. So, he has a .923 in this tournament, which I think is the top save percentage among the 4 goalies who have played. Not really saying a lot, and I think this game was probably one of the easiest he's had this entire calendar year. So I'm sure he appreciated not having to do too much. A nice introductory win for his return to Team USA. Been a while since he's repped the U.S. flag, so cool to see him get back to national team action. It's been a while for a lot of these guys, if they have even repped. Kyle Connor, he didn't really have a game that I think a lot of folks will remember. He did record a tertiary assist on one of the later goals, but otherwise not exactly able to get a lot going, which he didn't really have to either, right? I don't think this was one of those games where you needed a big standout performance from one of the top goal scorers like him. The Tkachuk brothers just kind of took over on the top line, sort of pounded Finland into oblivion, and it was basically down to the other lines to just be, relatively careful with the puck. Don't do anything too crazy. If you have a flashy opportunity, take it, but otherwise, you're probably just trying to be safe and not do anything too insane. So for the Jets, I think they can be happy with their performances here. We did get to see Patrick Laine again. It's always nice when he's around. He didn't really have a game that I think he'll be impressed with, but, just nice to see him, right? We all still have a little bit of a soft spot for him, or at least I know a lot of us do. Some of you probably don't, but like I said, if Hanel had actually been on this Finnish team, it wouldn't have changed the scoreline, but I think the defense would have actually genuinely improved, and that's insane to say something about a guy who hasn't played in like a month. So, not great for Finland. And it actually sets up a very interesting weekend scenario where if Sweden beats Finland, because Team Canada did not get all 3 points in their game against Sweden, if the U.S. somehow triumphs over Canada, which is highly unlikely in my mind, but a possibility, it could be a really intense final couple of days of this tournament before the knockout. So keep an eye on that. The U.S. currently leads the table at 3 points. And because you have only like 2 or 3 opportunities to really put yourself a little bit further up in the standings, it means that it's an absolute sprint towards, I guess, what you can call the playoff stages of this one. So should be a fascinating weekend of hockey. We'll have a preview of those games on tomorrow night's episode just because, there's probably not going to be a lot that happens between now and Friday. But amidst all of that, you are probably wondering a little bit about at least 1 or 2 of the Jets' trade targets. One of them is playing for Team USA, Brock Nelson. You see me saying Brock. I have some thoughts about his game. He wasn't like the most noticeable player out there, but he had a couple of good shifts, and I think in general, I liked what I saw out of him. We'll chat about what I think he can probably bring to Winnipeg, and if, the Jets should still be in on him, or should they go a different route in just a little bit. Before we dive into all of that, though, did want to let you know about our wonderful friends and partners at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. It's one of the highest protein nuts, and each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. And you have a couple of options. They've got a shellless one in case you just want to pop a few in your mouth and don't have to worry about the shells. But if you're like me, it actually is kind of nice having the shells. You have a little bit of work to do. I come from Maryland, so we have blue crabs. It's like cracking into a crab and getting some great meat, except it's nutty, nut-based protein. And it comes with all 9 essential amino acids. It's great for you, and it's super convenient, super easy. You just grab a pack and go. So if you are ready to get in on the action, get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit Wonderful Pistachios to learn more and place your order. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about Team USA and their performance against Team Finland, well, the Jets might have some interest in this game, right? Aside from the Jets that are actively repping Team USA, there could be a potential future Jet repping Team USA that is of interest, and it's Brock Nelson. You've heard me talk about him probably for a good 2 years now. Last year, I was interested in him as a potential acquisition over like a Monahan. Nelson is now an expiring free agent, and so the Jets probably have a renewed interest in him. And I think Friedman or Merrick or one of the top NHL media guys is really into the idea of having him in Winnipeg. I think it actually might be Craig Button. I think Button has been the one that's really been leading the charge for Nelson to Winnipeg, which, you know, given some of the rumors around Nelson, it's very interesting to see which option he goes with. There is a suggestion that the Islanders have made him a 3-year contract offer, which, you know, given that he's probably towards the end of his career, does make sense. And 3 years of term is actually something where New York could easily move that contract pretty quickly, right? So Nelson, I think, provides really good middle six scoring value. I like his size, and I think in tonight's game, you saw him with some really fine hand-eye coordination. He's always been, I would say, a fairly underrated scorer. Jets fans kind of know him as a net front terror. He's been just a pain in the butt on the power play. Every time he posts up in front of Hellebuyck or whoever's in net, it's always a nightmare, right? Because he's got, you know, huge size at 6'4", but he's very lanky. He's mobile. He skates well, and he actually has incredible stick control, right? One of his famous things is to just tip pucks very deftly past goalies, and he's done it a couple of times against the Jets. I think he had one, was it last year? I think it was maybe last season or early this season, where he tipped one that was really high, and Hellebuyck never really had a chance. It was a perfect deflection. I want to say it was last year or maybe even earlier. All these games start to blur together, but I think the fact that Nelson, I'm pretty sure, has done it more than once against the Jets, and it's a pretty repeatable skill of his, really speaks to the fact that if he comes to Winnipeg, man, and gets on that second power play unit, they are going to feast. I mean, the second power play unit is already really good. The top power play unit is unstoppable. You have two of those, like, it's just a joke, right? I've kind of talked about Winnipeg maybe actually being too good on the power play, where I sort of worry if, you know, you get into the playoffs and the lenient reffing has some kind of an impact, right? They know that the Jets power play could decide a series, and so maybe they will give us less calls on top of the already reduced calls that you're likely to get in the playoffs. So it's going to be an interesting thing. But Nelson's not just a power play specialist. He's just a really good even strength player. I thought he was very active tonight. I thought he was fast, and his puck control was good. He rang it off the crossbar on a beautiful shot, and I just feel like his presence alongside Perfetti and Ehlers, or wherever you really want to use him, could be tremendous. The only thing with him, and it does kind of come with this whole, you know, do you want to go with term or the rental option conversation, is if you go for him, it probably means that you can't do a lot else, right? You're not going to be able to go for another player with term. You're probably using a lot of your trade assets that you might have been looking to dump into a McCann, or maybe if you're really crazy, you're going for a Dobson and really chasing a top pairing young D. I mean, it's going to limit your options pretty quickly. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't do more. I just think with Nelson being a pretty hot commodity and a big-time rental, it's going to cost you, what, like a first prospect and usually like some sort of a roster player or something. It's always like the typical package. And I kind of worry if the Jets do that, you know, is that the best use of resources? Now that we know McCann is actively being shopped and is legitimately available, and the fact that Winnipeg, in my mind, I think is giving very big hints that they're going for something really big this year. I just wonder if Nelson is the best possible return that you can get. And as much as I am on his train, and I think it would actually make a lot of sense if he comes here and maybe even signs a short-term deal, I sort of wonder what his thought process is and if that's how Winnipeg really wants to play this. Do they want somebody who they've already got contract control with in a trade, or are they going to try and do this with Nelson where he comes in with the expectation of playing for another 2 to 3 seasons in Winnipeg? He's like 32 at this point, and he is slowing down. That is legitimately a thing you'd have to worry about. And, you know, I don't know what his next contract is. If it's like in the $6 million range, I think it's probably fine. You start pushing past that, and it's a little questionable. And, you know, with having two centers in your top six who are not necessarily top line franchise level centers, on the level of the McKinnon and stuff. It is a fair bit of cap space tied up into those two positions. So, for the Jets, now that Lowry's kind of proven he can play with Ehlers to a degree, do you look to make that your option? Do you want to have maybe a Nelson alongside Niederreiter or something? Do you want to look for a McCann who can kind of do both spots, whether it's out wide or down the middle? I don't know. I think it's a really tough call. And what I think is really going to kind of push me one way or another is kind of what happens with the rest of this break. You notice I've talked a little bit about the Vilardi party towards the third portion of this episode. And this really speaks to a broader thing that I'm wondering with the Jets. These next 2 weeks, Winnipeg has sort of said that they're going to be aggressive with the contract negotiations. I think that there is an increased urgency to not only get these players signed and extended, but also to do so because it can be evidence of getting guys to commit and that people are bought in on the vision of this team. For years, we've kind of heard about Winnipeg being not a prime destination. And it's not so much that the players themselves really hate the city. They've got family considerations, schools, living conditions, housing market stuff. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why they might not be interested in moving to Winnipeg, which, for me personally, having been to the city, I'm like, I don't fully get it, but I guess, I'm not a really affluent, hockey family member. So I love Winnipeg. I thought it's a great city. I come from Baltimore, a very similar blue collar city. And so for me, it felt like a second home almost. But, I can understand why it's a little bit tricky to convince others of the same thing. But for the Jets, if they get guys to start committing, if they get some big contract extensions, especially with like your early to mid 20s guys, along with already having Hellebuyck, Niederreiter, Scheifele, and those guys locked up, does that make your trade deadline more attractive, right? Because the Jets are going to have to, if they're going for a termed player, likely request somebody to waive their no movement or no trade clause. That requires some pretty big pool. And if you're the Jets, is this where you might be able to do it, right? You sign a big player or two in this next couple of weeks, you convince him to lock in, or maybe you make some overtures to Nelson or something and get him bought in. I don't know how this would all work, but I wonder if there is this feeling like Winnipeg has to start doing this stuff really quickly because they want to swing for the fences. I think the Jets are looking at the playoff field. I think that they understand this might be one of the best opportunities they ever have to go for it. The team's in first place in the league. It's got an elite goaltender playing at a Vezina level. They've got, really good depth, a top line that has generally been good enough for the most part and is capable of at least keeping up or being break even. It's not like it was last year where it was just bad. Kyle O'Connor is having a career season, and so that's really been able to help elevate that trio to a level where it's acceptable, right? And it lets you have a little more flexibility to build around it since you are unlikely to change the top line. But I kind of wonder how all of this over the next week or so during this break is going to play out. And I've got some theories, but I think it's a really great opportunity to also do some scouting. Parayko, we saw him last night, and I thought he looked pretty good. Next to Morrissey, again, I think the foot speed thing might be an issue. With Nelson, you don't have to worry about that. And if Nelson wants to do a short-term contract extension, I think ideally I was kind of hoping in the $5 to $5.5 million range. That's also probably not happening. So, this will be an interesting one. I think that there's a lot of things at play. Now that you have Jets reps in these teams, maybe they're having some behind the doors, conversations over dinner. Maybe Brad Marchand could be a Jet at some point. I don't know. There's so many options out there. And, I almost get dizzy thinking about how good this trade deadline could be. And also a little nervous that maybe the Jets aren't going to be able to pull off the miracle that I hope they are. But I don't know. I just have a lot of really good vibes about this coming March. And maybe even before that, maybe the Jets jump the gun and try to preempt the market. Winnipeg has a lot of cap space. They have done a fantastic job of being very careful about banking that stuff. They've been very disciplined in how much they're spending and trying to control. And, they now have a ton to work with. And that makes this next couple of weeks and months, in my opinion, really exciting. Winnipeg's, infamous January collapse has not come. It's not even been, a thing you've even remotely had a hint at. It's just not even happened. And look, I do have some concerns about the 5v5 play. You've heard me talk about it. You have heard me talk about the top line against better teams. It's still a thing, but I think that there are ways to work around it. And with the playoff field around looking not that great, hey man, all I'm saying is, all these teams are going to probably be trying to make similar moves. It's really incumbent upon the Jets to go for it. And if Nelson and part of this whole package, maybe he comes with Dodson too, you want to sell the farm and go for it with these guys, I'm all in, man. This is like an all-in kind of season. I'm looking forward to it. And I think the Jets just might have something in the works, if not next week, in the subsequent weeks, because Vilardi stayed in Winnipeg, right? He had a little visit with a youth camp earlier this afternoon. And the fact that he and his girlfriend both hung around in Winnipeg for this entire break so far makes me wonder, and again, this is pure speculation, but I'm wondering if there's a contract extension coming real soon. Let's chat about that in just a couple of seconds. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Factor. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well very easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. Factor also comes with great ingredients. It's tasty, it's convenient. You just toss it in the microwave and it's so fast, and it comes with everything you could possibly need. They have over 40 options with 8 dietary preferences every week, and you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether you need Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or keto requirements. Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. As somebody who likes recently, or apparently over the past couple of years, has become more of a gym rat, the nutrition side of things, especially with protein intake and all, becomes really important. Factor is super convenient. I've seen their menu selection and even tried a couple of their meals. It tastes great. It's very affordable. And you know what? There's a special offer for all of you listeners because you can eat smart with Factor and get started by going to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50off. And again, that is code LockedOnNHL50off at checkout to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnNHL50off. Now, be sure to use numerics for 50 off. It's not spelled out, it's numerics. But again, at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50off. And that'll get you 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor meal box. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up really quickly with some potentially exciting speculation. Now again, I will caution that this is more speculative, but some things to me, in my personal feeling, are lining up. So Gabriel Vilardi and his partner did not leave the city for the start of the break. Now, that might not be that much in and of itself to look into. Where I started getting kind of excited is the fact that, so he did a surprise little appearance at a WJHA youth camp today and hung out with the kids. And it was posted by True North's Foundation social media account. I'm kind of wondering if the reason that he has stuck around is because his agent is, maybe finally closing in on an extension. Normally, again, I wouldn't really read too much into this kind of stuff. And it could still be that. It could be total, coincidence that Vilardi was just around. Maybe he didn't have plans to leave the city. Maybe, getting back and forth across the border would be too much of a pain. But I'm just thinking, a guy and his partner hanging around for a major 2-week break in Winnipeg when Winnipeg itself has said that they want to make contract negotiations with some other impending free agents, especially their big ticket ones, a priority over the next couple of weeks, makes me think that we might be closer to a Gabriel Vilardi extension than initially thought. I kind of was wondering if maybe this would be a conversation in the summer because he's an RFA, right? So it's not like he had to rush to do this. But I kind of feel like there may be, and this is kind of tying into what I was talking about earlier, some impetus to get the stuff done as fast as possible. I think the Jets want some cap clarity going forward. I think they want to have players under contract control, not only to map out and project what their spending is looking like and what they can acquire, but also if they have to go to a team with a big trade package and ask for an opportunity to talk to a player and ask them to waive their no trade or no movement clause, you want some evidence that you've got some stuff in store for them to join. It can't be this situation where they're coming for like, especially if they've got term, they can't be walking into a situation where half the team is already out of contract next season, right? Winnipeg has Ehlers expiring after this year. Connor is, a free agent after next season. And so having more guys signed in the vein of a Hellebuyck, a Morrissey, obviously Scheifele's already locked up. That, I think, is a potentially really compelling argument that you are very serious and committed to building a core to win with. And, Hellebuyck and Scheifele themselves have probably been promised some really big swings from the Jets. And that's where I sort of wonder if that's why there's so much urgency, to do this. And look, I think a lot of GMs will say this kind of stuff. And sure, I think all of them are working with the agents that are willing to talk to them over this break. But I think in particular, the fact that Chevy really called it out a couple of weeks ago really stuck out in my mind because we know Chevy speak, right? He's not a guy who's often tipping his hand really aggressively. So if he says that something is a focus for him, to me, it just feels like there's some real weight behind it. It makes me rather eager to anticipate what comes along with it. And so I feel like Vilardi might be signing a contract extension here pretty soon. I would be really happy in the 5 to 6 year range. If it's longer, hey, that's great. Even if it's like 7, 8 years or whatever, I don't really care. That 6+ year range is fine with me because at that point you probably don't care anyways. You're mostly focused on the next 3-ish or so as this big competitive window. And Vilardi, you have a contract with him until he's like 31 or 32. Great, get it inked. I don't care. I'm kind of putting him sort of in the $6.5 million bracket. I feel like maybe that or maybe closer to 7 is what he'll get. I am curious to know how that'll shape out, but he's on like a 60-ish, maybe a little bit over point pace this season. He does have some health injury and concerns over the past couple of years. And so maybe this is like a really good win-win for both sides, right? You get a top line player at a reasonable cap hit that's not crazy. He has some, real guarantees and is getting a continuous salary, despite having some injury risks. And I think it kind of works out for both groups. It'll also leave the Jets room to make moves in subsequent seasons, right? If it's like a $6.5 million cap hit, it is very workable. Even $7 million, very workable. Maybe he gets closer to 8. We'll have to see. I don't know how much the Winnipeg tax is going to work, but a lot of guys, when they sign big Jets deals, they usually do it slightly under market or maybe even reasonably well under market. You think about another team trying to sign Hellebuyck now after what he's done this year, and holy crap, man, he'd be making absolute friggin' bank. I don't know how it's possible that he's actually gotten better, but man, I think Winnipeg, by the grace of the hockey gods, has come away with an absolute win over the past 2 years in terms of how their contract structure is looking, how the cap situation is looking. Everything I think that the front office really gambled with has generally paid off pretty nicely. So I think that this could be a really good week to, prove that you're really committed to this group, that the guys are excited to come back and keep contributing for the next several years. And I think Vilardi's in a really good spot where he feels like, or at least, as an outsider, I would be pretty happy with this team. I'm getting top line billing. The fans love me. I've got my own Macarena song. How can you not be really in love with being a Jet right now? Finally, after the instability of what happened in LA, he's got a place he can settle down. And I'm hoping that that's enough to push him to ink that big deal. So we'll just have to wait and see. If all of this ends up being for naught, at the very least, we know that he's a pretty friggin' cool dude, and that when he does get that big extension, which I'm hoping is at least in the summer, if not right now, it's going to be, for a good long while. So excited to hear the Macarena in Winnipeg for many years to come. But let me know if you think that this is likely. Give me your thoughts on the contract extension and maybe even a prediction of what you think he might be doing with his actual contract. Do you think it's going to be 6 years less? Do you think it's going to be 7+? Drop your thoughts and the cap hit that you're predicting in the comments below. I think I will go 7.25 by 6. So that's my prediction. Give me yours below. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Of course, tomorrow we'll have previews ahead of the big weekend slate of tournament games, Finland versus Sweden in the afternoon, and then at 8 p.m. on Saturday, USA versus Canada. Promises to be an absolute blast. But we'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for Valentine's Day hockey, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.